Hey everybody, and welcome back to our scenario playthrough series. We are on scenario number 12 today. This is Karts and Coasters. We've got to get 1,000 guests in our park by the end of October year 3 with park rating of at least 600. But we've got a pretty good park to start here. We've got 2 big wooden coasters, and we've got 2 gigantic go-kart tracks. Gigantic is the main keyword there. They are way too big. We're going to have to shorten them up a little bit. The coasters themselves aren't totally awful, especially this one here, but the other one is a little sprawling and definitely in need of some work. I don't know about you guys, but if you're familiar with parks, I think you probably would think of Mount Olympus in Wisconsin when you think about this park with go-karts and wooden coasters, and we're going to try and stick to that wooden coaster theme. It's fairly dense in terms of the tree coverage, so it's kind of hard to see what's going on. So we're kind of looking at the pathway here. There's a pathway that's missing connecting the exit of the go-kart track near the entrance up to kind of the main path, so we got to fix that here straight away. But I think the idea for this one is going to be to shorten the go-kart tracks for one, and fix the wooden coasters, and then just build out our park like you typically would. So then we're going to fix that little miss there on the pathway network. You actually don't have a lot of really suitable space to work with here for placing kind of a collective midway or just a cluster of rides, as we kind of like to do. I don't necessarily like to scatter them around. I kind of like to cluster them. But we can do a little bit of landscape adjustment, which we're going to do right here, and give ourselves something to work with, at least to start. Spending a little bit of money on this, but I think it's going to be worth it just to give us some kind of a basis to really start our park with. You can see I've already shortened the one go-kart track, but we're going to play with it a little bit more. We've lowered the laps to a single lap as well, just to really kind of get it over with. The unfortunate thing is that once the winner crosses the finish line, they've got to get all the way around again before the next one can launch. So it's kind of a challenge there, because effectively, even if you're doing one lap, you're really signing up for 2. So it's just something to think about as we go through. They're definitely cool tracks, and I do really like how they interact with all the landscaping and everything. But from a realism standpoint and just from a park management standpoint, it's got to go. So we are starting our little plaza here with a carousel, as we typically do, just because it's a good anchor ride, I suppose, just to get us started. Using a different type of pathway here just to kind of call out these spaces a little bit. I don't necessarily know about this tile pathway compared to the dirt pathway. It's definitely a kind of 2 ends of the spectrum there, with a kind of a super fancy one with a kind of super low end one with the dirt. But I haven't used this path terribly much, and I feel like it's a decent look. I'm going to clear out some trees too, just so we can get a visual into this. There's just, it's almost really hard to read this park just because it's so thick with the landscaping throughout. So I think it's important to kind of selectively demolish the various trees, and a lot of that will come with the rides too, but we want to at least give ourselves some visibility when we can. We're also going to use the wood sidewalls here quite a bit, only because the rest of the park kind of really starts up that whole premise, and we're going to just carry it through just because it makes sense to keep going with the same sort of theme. So usually, as our second ride kind of always goes, it's going to be a scrambler, so we're going to place that one right here as well. Again, just to give ourselves a little bit of a cluster here, and give the guests kind of a couple things to do in one spot, so we can really just start getting folks through the gate, getting a little area built, and then we'll expand out a little bit. While I want to adjust the coasters, and we're going to get to both of those actually in this episode, I do want to wait until we've got a little bit of an income coming in before I close our 2 big money makers to adjust them. So we'll first set ourselves up here to build some things, and then we'll start going to do some adjustments. We're going to shorten the second go-kart track here, take out this whole big section, and now it's a little bit more manageable there, especially once we get this little slalom gone. Extend our station just a little bit too. That lets us get a couple more cars in there as well, which helps us increase that capacity overall. I do kind of like how both of these coasters interact with each other, and we're going to try and keep a little bit of that towards the end, but now it does make sense for us to modify the first one. It's the one that I have probably the larger problem with as far as layout goes. There's a lot of kind of weird elements there, like that kind of figure eight turnaround. And we're going to try, as we always do, to keep the general spirit of the layout of the in-game thing while still trying to add a little bit of realism. So if you are familiar with, now it's Fantasy Island, I think. Or Niagara Amusement Park, I guess is what it is now. It used to be Martin's Fantasy Island up in New York City near Niagara Falls. There's a CCI Wooden Coaster there called Silver Comet, and one of the things that it has, it's a much more modest sized coaster than this, but it has this kind of like high up figure eight-ish type section, so that's what we're going with right here. So it's sort of a cross between, I guess, Boss at Six Flags St. Louis, where you have some of that high structure and fairly big speed, with the Martin's Fantasy Island type coaster there, where it's got a lot of this kind of tall, meandering structure to it. The terrain is surprisingly, I don't know if it's favorable, but it slopes away from the lift hill, which means that this coaster is kind of positively gigantic when you get down to it. So it ends up being this sort of huge ride in the end. Playing around a little bit here to see if we can do a little bit more with it. I don't actually love when the structure is quite this dominating, but it's what we're given to work with, and I don't really want to modify the layout to anything that's, I guess, heavy enough that it will really change the overall look of the thing. So we're going to turn it into sort of a quasi out and back layout, and I'm leaving in a lot of the kind of trial and error, as it were, so you can kind of get an idea of what you work through. Sometimes layouts come to you quick, sometimes it takes a little bit more time, and this one definitely took a little bit of time and wasn't super satisfying to begin with either. You'll see here the mid-course brake run that we're adding in. It kind of has a little bit of an odd sense here with this whole turnaround that ends up having a fair bit of a flat section, which I really don't love, but it was kind of what we had to work with at the time. And there's a little bit of a balance too, because we're trying to get a good coaster layout, but also time's ticking, so we only have till year 3, and we need to kind of get a move on, finish it up, and get going on the next thing. So there's a little bit of at some point when you got to say, hey, this is good enough. We will, at the end of next episode, look at a solution that I came up with after the stream was over and after this park was finished, because I still wasn't satisfied with it, so we played around a little bit more. But the idea here is to come off the mid-course brake run, go diagonal, and hug that structure again. Whenever possible, I really like to hug the structure of a taller section, just because it's a common strategy you see in real wooden coasters. You share bents with multiple sections of track, and it just looks nice in general. So we're going to hug that track as much as we can all the way up into the nestled section there inside the lift and drop. And then we're going to go back diagonal here to cross over towards the brake run here, including this sort of diagonal trench that we'll flesh out a little bit later. But right now I just want to get the layout done. Still trying to look at this section here and decide what we want to do with it. The diagonal isn't quite long enough to do a mid-course brake run, nor do we really want to put one right after the drop, after that turnaround. But it's still not quite my favorite spot. So we've said enough on that. So right now we're trying to get to the ending here, and initially I wanted to try and use that tunnel that the thing crossed underneath of before coming up and around. The downside of kind of modernizing these coasters is that now we've got to consider a shorter station but a longer brake run, especially if we're using 3 trains here. So we need quite a lot larger brake run, so we can't quite do the same thing that it did before, where I ducked underneath that brake run, wrapped around, and then came into a short section there. So we are instead doing this sort of thing where it comes into the brakes high, drops down, turns around, and then hits the second brakes. So when you do brake runs, you want to have the length of all of your trains plus 1. So if we're using 3 trains here, we really want a length of 4 total trains worth of brakes, which we don't necessarily have here, but we're a little bit short, but we're going to use some creative liberties here and sacrifice maybe a little bit of realism. The reason that we have a drop after the first brake run, this is a common CCI tactic, Custom Coasters International, and you see this on quite a few of their coasters where the brake run starts a little bit higher up, and that's because the ride's going to come in at a slower speed. Obviously, higher up, you use up some more of the momentum, and it comes in at a slower speed. These are clamp brakes, remember, so there's wear and tear because it's metal hitting on metal. So the slower you enter it, the less wear wear and tear you have. So if we enter the first brake run fairly high up, and then we have a shorter drop just after that down into the second brake run, your overall strategy is going to be less wear and tear and maintenance on the whole thing. So it's a kind of a cool tactic, even though it looks a little bit weird. I'd encourage you to watch some videos of the coasters at Mount Olympus, notably Hades 360, which has a fairly large drop after the brake run, which is kind of funny almost, and some of the other ones there too, because that's what we're inspired by here. So I did come back and add an extra helix there just because the ride didn't feel quite large enough. So we did that, and we're finished up, and we're going to move straight away into the next thing now that we've got that coaster running again, but we need our money. So Log Flume is next, and I figure we've deleted a lot of the go-karts and a lot of the wooden coaster from some of these areas, so it makes sense for us to reuse some of these sections of trenches and tunnels and things like that. And I don't know, it's kind of a fun challenge, I guess, to try and squeeze in our rides with good design in an area that's already sort of pre-planned for us. So I'm using that trench there for a little drop and splash down for our flume and turn out into the lake, and then we're going to come back up and into the brake run, or not the brake run, but the station here using this existing pathway. So kind of an interesting placement for the whole thing, and a little bit larger drop than we would typically do on a flume, with the kind of double drop too, which I do like those. You don't see them super often, but I think they're fun. We've got a lot of space to work with here, and not a lot of it is suitable for too much else because it's fairly mountainous and not super regular. So we aren't probably going to put anything else there, so we can really just use up the whole space for a flume space. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to wrap around the hillside here, cut through the middle there, leave some of the trees so that we still have that sort of wooded look to it. But it's a decent start. So we're going to throw in a mid-drop here, and I don't typically do this on a lot of the flumes that we built so far in the scenario play, just because I've kind of avoided making them too incredibly long. But a lot of the older aerodynamics flumes typically had two different lifts and two different drops, sort of a mid-drop that kind of gave it a little bit of interest in the middle of the layout, and then that final big splash at the end. And I'm always a big fan of saving the kind of biggest splash till the end. It always feels a little bit weird to get the excitement over with very early on. So we're going to do that and then come up and have a short section there to the final drop. We are also going to add a little bit of a reverser section in here. Not so much from a realism standpoint, just from a fact that it's a piece that's available and it adds some more interest, so hey, we might as well. Not that it's totally uncommon. You do see it on a lot of the mock log flumes and some of the others as well. We have a fairly long station here, so we can play around with our entrance and our exit, and we're actually going to change this up here just a little bit later with moving our entrance and our exit and trying to see what we can do with this kind of giant walkway. I'm not a huge fan of the large amount of supports underneath some of these wood walkways. Just the lattice structure just doesn't really look great, and we can't dress it up with theming, so instead we're going to stick our entrance or our exit underneath of there and kind of use that space a little bit. It's there, we might as well put it to use, and then instead we're going to take the what was the exit there and turn it into an entrance and kind of duck down here and cut away a little bit of our landscaping and have a slightly subterranean queue there, which you can imagine has some kind of theming or something inside. So now we'll go back through and connect up this pathway that wraps around the backside here. Right now this pathway is kind of useless because it really doesn't connect much of anything. Certainly the flume's there, but there's not really that much else other than that. So we will stick some stuff on there here a little bit later. With the amount of guests that we're going to be bringing in, with 1,000 guests in total, we do need a fair bit of pathway just to accommodate the guests. So beyond queues and everything else, you don't want a small network of paths just to keep, because it's going to feel really crowded really quickly. So in the end, the better option there is to at least build some additional pathway space and make it worth your while. gonna do a swinging ship here up on the hillside, which kind of seems like a cool vantage point. And the queue kind of dips down there. In my head, that's sort of like almost a rope bridge or something you'd walk across to get onto the ride. Maybe just something a little more themed, but we're gonna do what we can with the lack of theming pieces that we have, or the ability to raise and lower stuff. But with that said, we're going to jump on to our third coaster here, and our first custom one. I said earlier that we're basing a lot of the thought process on this park after Mount Olympus in Wisconsin, and this one is based off of Cyclops at the park, which is sort of a medium-sized wooden coaster, maybe tending towards the smaller end, but it has this sort of wild curving drop towards the end of it. And at one point, before it was reprofiled a little bit, you actually had to be over 18 to sit in the back seat. And it's since been adjusted a little bit, and that restriction is no longer there. But it had a fairly cool curving drop sort of into the valley around the station, and we're going to try and keep the spirit of that. So that's where we start, right in the middle. And then, as you've seen with all of the coasters that I tend to build, I rarely start with the station. I usually start with either the base of the drop or kind of the key feature. And to me, that's one of the key secrets of coaster building is start with your element that has the most interest or that has the most requirements for a good setting. So this one, we know we wanted it off that hillside right there and curving drop, so we're going to start with that, and then let's try and figure it out from there. So I'm going to leave in, again, all of the iteration or iterative process that we go through for this. And I don't want this to be a very big coaster, for one. We've got two fairly large wooden coasters already. Obviously, the lighter wooden coaster is really large, and this one itself is fairly big. Actually, the tunnel that it drops into is substantial. Hadn't realized initially how far down it goes additionally, so I don't want to go too much larger than that. So we're kind of struggling here initially of where does it go from here, because if that drop is essentially the finale, then 65 feet that it runs into is sort of the midpoint on the ride, so you got to go higher than that at some section. You don't need to go much higher, but I want to wrap around and interact with this coaster a little bit and trying to play around with what we can do there. Got a coaster lift hill that crosses the other one, which is kind of fun, but I don't quite like the way that this is setting up at the moment. So we're going to play around with it a little bit more here and see. And sometimes it's just a matter of trying stuff, seeing what works and seeing what doesn't. Like I said earlier, you've got to watch out just because time's ticking, but at the same time, it really makes sense to have an idea in your head of kind of sort of what you want it to do, even if it's a couple of elements, and then go from there and try and build it out. And if it doesn't work, then just pause and think about it. This is a good point, I guess, to say that all of these videos that you guys watch here on YouTube are streamed on Twitch, and I build all of this live, so there's a lot of pausing and thinking about it and talking about strategy, and there's a lot of stuff that I cut out of these videos for YouTube only because I don't necessarily want to narrate a 3-hour video or whatever, but it's fun, I think, and you guys are certainly welcome to jump onto Twitch and catch one of those live. Usually it's Fridays in the early afternoon for Eastern time. You can also pick out the VODs that are on Twitch that sit there for a little while longer. If there's interest, actually, and I guess I should add, if anybody is interested in maybe a second YouTube channel just for the straight raw archive streams, which have the original commentary, they don't have the chat with it, but maybe there'd be some interest in that, perhaps, but let me know if there is. But anyway, back to the coaster. We have kind of gone a different direction here and turned opposite the direction of the curving drop and have gone kind of in this back section here, and now we're playing around with it, trying to figure out how the lift is going to work. So this is part of that building backwards section here, and what I'm doing here is just aligning the track, because I want this lift hill to be parallel to the track on the way in. So even though that's not the right height, it is the right location, so it gives us a starting point to work from, and it lets us kind of play around too to know what we got to meet up with, and that's a good way to kind of first pick out how you want to lay the thing out, and then from there figure out how it connects. So that's what we're doing right now, as we're kind of iterating this process of getting back to that point, and right now we get it right there, and actually at a little bit of a taller hill, and shockingly it fits underneath of the other wooden coaster's lift hill. I think we're exactly as high as we can be, which is fairly lucky, I think. But it ends up being sort of a weird layout, but I like it. It's a sort of feels traditional CCI type and all of that. And now we have our station there looking over this big drop, just like Cyclops does in real life. And now we just got to end it. So thought it might be sort of interesting to come back up underneath of the station itself, and we can kind of bury it into the hillside here, which I think is kind of fun. Wooden coasters are one of the few coasters in the game that are cool to have on the ground. You don't want to do it too much, but it's not necessarily an issue as it is with some of the other coasters where you just don't want them to sit on the ground just because it looks bad. But and it's not super realistic. But this one is wooden coasters are okay. So now we got to figure out how to end it, and typically I would kind of do a big brake run and everything else, but if we go back to Mount Olympus and thinking about that a little further, not all of their coasters have, actually none of their coasters have a second train. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to actually just end it right into the station because we're going to have a little less pacing at the end of the ride, and we can do a single train, and that's totally fine. The other ones have plenty of capacity. It's going to hurt us a little bit from a scenario standpoint, but from a cleanliness of layout standpoint, I think I'm okay with it. So the brakes for this ride will be shared with the station itself. Don't have to worry about any kind of issues with blocks and everything because there's just a single train, so there really aren't any blocks. So we'll put in our entrance here and our exit, and we move the go-kart track again, shorten it up just a little bit more. That lets us put in a little plaza here and rearrange the pathways here just a little bit. There's somebody falling into the void, so we appreciate their sacrifice. And here we are. So now we can clear out this whole section and give ourselves a little plaza just here. Again, we're going to use the same different pathway texture, and for some reason I used some cobblestone there. I'm not entirely sure what I was doing, but to my credit, I was sick with a chest cold when I recorded this. But same with that random piece of queue that is up towards the top section of the clip there a minute ago, but we'll get that in the next video. Put a little fence here around the go-kart track, and now we've got some space here set up nicely for this coaster, and I think it works very well. The shorter train, too, is kind of nice. So there is our first original one. We're going to call it sort of like Cyclops because it is sort of like Cyclops. We are very clever with our naming. So we now have 3 coasters, which is probably a decent way to start. Well, a lot of throw up on the paths. We're going to adjust our handyman a bit here just to give ourselves a little bit of space to work with and clean it up a little bit, help our park rating. Park rating is never really an issue, if we're being honest, as long as your park is just decently put together and you have a little bit of coverage from a handyman standpoint and you don't have lost guests. It's never really an issue. I don't think ever run into a trouble with park rating. It's always just the guests getting in time. So we're about halfway through right now, and we've got about half of the guests, a little higher than that, which is good. So we've got to build up some flat rides here to help that out. We're going to do a double SNS tower, and up on the hillside here I feel like is always a cool spot for these just because you have that great view already, and then you're going to go even higher. And as we've done a few times in this playthrough series, is we're going to offset them just a little bit just because I feel like it gives it slightly more interest and just works a little bit better off grid. As much as we can break the grid, I like to do it. So it's sort of a visual break rather than anything with custom scenery, for example. But we'll make the towers look the same, just with 2 different colored pneumatic air tubes on the inside. So there's one red, one yellow, and we've got one that's a shot drop and one's a turbo shot and one that's a shot and drop. So that way we've got our 2 coverages there. Nice thing is that by doubling up, we get some extra soft guest gap, so we can help ourselves on our victory conditions here. As we get a little further into the series and we get to some of the harder scenarios, it is going to be a little bit more challenging to just kind of casually run through and beat the game like we've been doing. So we got to think through it a little bit harder than we had previously, just because we got to get our guests right. So the more coverage we can get in there, the better, and we'll go from there. All right, so now we are going to adjust our second wooden coaster. So this is the other one. And we're going to generally stick with the same type of layout that it had before. It's got this out and back that is kind of nice with a little bit of a dog leg there in the middle, so it's sort of an L shape, but we're going to adjust it a little bit more than that and make it a little smoother, I think. I do love this little drop underneath of the pathway there into this valley, so we're going to extend it just a little bit and make it a little bit wider kind of overall. Keep that curving drop there. And then we're going to have two sort of speed hills here at the beginning and go out, turn around, come back, and then go diagonal back to the home. So here's where we find out that this goes way deeper than we thought it did initially, or at least I thought it did. So it had an extra like full steep piece underground. So we're going to get rid of that, smooth it out a little bit, and this firmly now becomes our medium-sized coaster. So we've got our small, our medium, and our large. We're going to use the go-kart track there to duck underneath. Unfortunately, right now we're crossing over top of our front plaza there, which is okay. We can just move that, and we will at some point here, but now we're at our turnaround here. Flat section, again, CCI tended to underbank their corners because if you bank it too far, then it requires an extra beam on the ledger for the vents, and that was more expensive, and CCI was always set up as being kind of an affordable option for wooden coasters. So that's why you see so few banked corners on these types of coasters, and that's why we're doing it here as well. The diving flat corner is only because that the banking doesn't exist in this game, so we are going to leave it alone. So now what I'm trying to do is get this whole thing to line up with the brake run on this side, so I kind of want to get this where it's just a straight shot back. So we're going to turn a little bit earlier rather than nestling it into the inside of that diving corner. Kind of move our pathway for this, which is fine. That's an easy thing to adjust. Can temporarily cut it off because there's plenty of connections across here. So now we can kind of follow the terrain here and go around that corner over a little hill and then head towards the ending right here. So now we're going to get into, unfortunately, this wooden coaster being in the way again. So we're going to actually end up sort of doing an interlacing station and brake run combo here. So I closed that other one to finish this one. We finish this in a fairly clean way. Again, higher up brake run drops down into the station. Get going and get that one open so we can be making some money there. And now we're going to readjust this to do the same thing. So a little bit of a climbing hill here and the brake run there at the end. Get rid of that little dip so we can have a longer brake run. Fully acknowledging this one does not meet what I just said earlier in the video about brake run length. You can see the cars kind of sticking up the little hill there. Not my favorite, but it's what we had to work with during the time that we had to build. So we're going to leave it for the duration here. But now both of our original wooden coasters are now edited to our satisfaction, or at least partial satisfaction. So I think we're going to roll with that. And now we can connect this up here in the middle. This hadn't been connected for most of the playthrough so far, and it just helps with peep wayfinding and everything else. It's a fairly simple park layout, so I'm not too worried about it, but it does give our guests a little bit of options now to move around. So we're going to create another little plaza there, again, just using that different pathway texture for some variation on the thing. It's about time, too, that we added some additional food and beverage areas, even though there's one not too far from here, just on the other side. But it gives some options, once again, and it's a cool little seating area there overlooking the finale of the wooden coaster. Add a little bit of theming, add a statue, and we are off to the races. So now we are going to hit our little final section for today's video, where we need to adjust this pathway since we have gone right underneath the wooden coaster, and rather than adjust the entire coaster, it's a lot easier to adjust the pathway. And even though it does line up quite nicely there with the plaza up above, I do like the centered symmetry and everything. At the same time, I'd rather keep the coaster and adjust our entrance. So in order to do that, we need to modify the coaster, or the go-karts, once more. And we actually have a second set of construction rights to cross over top of this pathway in front of our entrance. We just need to move our outrun over by one, and then we need to build our in-run. In order to do that, we first got to move this section of pathway, so we'll do that first here. Adjust it down so it connects, and there we go. Now we can remove this and we are free to build up our go-kart tracks to our heart's content. So now we're going to go duck into this mountainside right here, put a little tunnel, since we've been getting rid of all the other ones, so at least harken back a little bit to the original look there. And we're going to cross back over. Kind of be a neat head-to-head moment there, especially if you're lagging behind a little bit in the race, or I guess far ahead, who knows. And now we can build ourselves kind of a little entry statement here, because you do come up to this first path before you actually get up to the plaza there. And this way we have some little meandering pathway, kind of a cool visual as it stacks up to the raised section there. And we are going to build ourselves a little bit of a water feature here, because we've got the hillside too. We might as well have an entry statement. So we'll build a little lagoon there, build our water kind of stacked up. We're going to use the ice texture here to simulate ourselves a waterfall, since we don't have the theming pieces for it. That's an RCT2 thing. And then we can theme it out just a little bit and get our coverage of the thing looking good. Put some bushes, put some rock and everything else like that. So I think it's kind of a decent little theme. Add ourselves a pathway here along, or a fencing line along the pathway, and we're good to go. So that's everything for today. Join us again here for part number 2 coming soon as we finish up the scenario. So until next time, thanks very much for watching.